Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast about other podcasts, where every single week we have a book club style discussion about a podcast we recommended last week. And at the end of the episode, we're going to recommend a brand new episode, and we're going to talk about that one next week. I'm Kirk.
And I'm Zach. And this week we are talking about a show called Nice Try. The specific episode is called Biosphere 2, the Theater of Utopia.
Yeah, and I don't actually know how I found this podcast, but I saw that it was a podcast about utopias. It's basically just all about utopias, and most of the time failed utopias. And well, all the time.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a successful one, we would have heard about it, right?
Yeah. This is the synopsis on the Vox website. The utopian impulse is very much alive today, expressed in ways small and large, from how we personalize our homes and improve our communities to how we reshape our political systems. Many of these themes are familiar to curbed readers. You know, I guess that's the what do you call it? Publication that they're in. In season 1 of Utopia, host Avery Trufelman, which I was wondering where I heard her voice before. She is from 99% Invisible.
Oh,
and
okay.
Also she had a spin-off show from that called Articles of Interest, which was all about like design and clothes, which I actually listened to a few episodes of that. That was really
99% Invisible is a great show.
So freaking good. Anyway, the show re-examines some of history's most fascinating attempts to build more perfect communities, including the capital city for a newly democratic India, an integrated mid-century suburb outside Philadelphia, and a self-sustained closed ecosystem in the Arizona desert. And that last one is the one we're going to talk about today, Biosphere 2.
And hilariously, I asked you when you first recommended this, is it like the Pauly Shore movie? Yeah, it kind of is like the Pauly Shore movie.
To be honest, I don't think I've seen Biodome. I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through, even as a kid.
It's not really like worth it, but it's there. It is a movie. And I did also see, quick side note, they did make a Hulu original, and I can't exactly tell if it's like a dramatization or a documentary about this.
Really?
Yeah, about this about the biosphere too. So the name of this movie is called Spaceship Earth, and it's a documentary. So this is like, if you kind of like the story of this entire thing, you can check out a documentary about it called Spaceship Earth.
That's one of my favorite rides at Epcot.
Yeah, it's actually, they just ride that ride, and that's the whole movie.
I would watch that.
Why? That's not even a good ride. I mean, it's a pretty good ride. It's an okay ride.
Okay, it's okay. It's okay.
It's like if taking a nap were a roller coaster.
Sometimes you got to find somewhere where there's good air condition and there's might be a little bit of entertainment when you're at Disney. There's a lot of times where you're like, I need that.
Yeah.
There was a ride that had Ellen DeGeneres in it that was like a 50-minute ride, which was insane. It was called like Ellen's Energy Adventure or something.
Wow. And
it moved, but very slowly, and it was all AC. The best place to take a nap. It was great.
How do they make a 50-minute Ellen DeGeneres ride?
I mean, it was early 90s. They didn't. I mean, things were a lot different, apparently.
They're just winging it. Well, we are off topic.
We are completely off topic. But Biosphere 2 is... I mean, it's fascinating, and we talked about a little bit about it in Todd's and the founder of it and everything, but it's how do you even explain it? It's the brainchild of this guy, John Allen, and he, an insane dude, crazy background, and he had this idea to basically have all of these different biomes inside of a greenhouse, essentially. And yes, it is the brainchild of a rich white dude. And he made friends with this very rich white dude called Ed Bass, who was like this multimillionaire. They didn't even say like he may have been a billionaire. Like they said he had limitless wealth. Because this thing, all said and done, was $250 million.
Yeah.
So it was like over $250 million. It's ridiculous. But this place was fascinating. It had a rainforest, a savanna, a desert, a marsh, an ocean, and like an agricultural area for farming. And it was all run by 8 people. And there'll be links in the show notes, but you got to see how big this place is. It's way bigger than I imagine in my head. Because I think my issue is I was imagining what I remember from Biodome.
It's not really. It doesn't look like Biodome.
It doesn't look like Biodome.
It looks like
really.
fancy Biodome.
But it was like I said, there was 8 people ran this whole place. You know, the ocean, all the farming, and they were just adventurous researchers. They weren't even scientists. I don't think any of them were trained as scientists, but they kind of pitched this as like this giant leap forward in science, and they were going to do all these experiments and stuff. And more than anything, it became more of like a psychological experiment for these people that got in there, because they said they were going to do it for 2 years. That they were going to be in there for 2 years. They weren't going to open and they weren't going to take anything from the outside or anything like that. And to be honest, I was kind of fascinated that they did make it. They made it through that 2 years.
Yeah, barely.
But
barely.
Not without a crap ton of drama and a ridiculous amount of hardship.
Yeah, and this all started in 91. And yeah, like you said, they wanted it to be a completely self-contained system. They wanted to essentially, they had carbon sinks in there with like the rainforest and the trees. They had all of these things where they were trying to figure out. Some of this is just so incredible to kind of think about how they had to process this. So they're like, okay, well, we want to have flowers in there. So then we need pollinators in there. Well, bats pollinate things, but what do bats eat? And so they have to go down an entire food chain if they want one thing in there that can literally be a food item. And so they have to like process every single part of this. And when you start to look at, we found a couple additional things, you know, because it really was just a ridiculous feat of engineering, because they built this entire thing. It kind of, as they go along, you're like, this is more and more insane. Like, I don't see a way where they can really pull this off, because you can't, how can you just close loop system this and survive? And literally they ended up saying that all they were doing was farming, because they didn't have pollinators. And so they were hand pollinating all their food. They would
hand
only
pollinating kind of blew my mind. It's like, what? You just need a little bitty paintbrush and just like touch this flower, touch that flower, touch this flower.
Yeah. And
that's how you hand pollinate.
And they couldn't eat anything that was not like grown in there. And everything, all the water that was in there was recycled for 2 years.
I will say in the Wikipedia for the, what is it? Biosphere 2, which it's Biosphere 2 because Biosphere 1 is Earth. So this is like Earth, the sequel, is what their concept was. I will say I did like the idea where it's like, okay, if we want to go live on another planet, we need to be able to replicate where we live now. So they were trying to replicate Earth in a controlled environment. But they just didn't go about it in a very scientific way.
And they ran into really weird problems, because one of their problems they had was they had just laid all the concrete. So underneath this whole thing is concrete. And then like Disney, underneath the concrete is the whole system of air conditioners and the things to move the air around. Literally, did they talk about the lungs in the show?
Mm-mm.
So I found this additional article that just is kind of like little snippets about this place. They have these 2 sections called the lungs, which is literally, it looks like a giant membrane essentially. And the reason it's there is for when the air expands and contracts because of the heat, because they're directly in the center of the Arizona desert is where they built this. And if it was completely airtight and the air like at night got really condensed, and then in the morning when it expanded, it could literally blow panels off the thing if it was airtight. So they made these things called lungs that are huge, like room size membranes that had give to them. So when the air would contract and expand, it would just move with it. So there was so many things about this that were so interesting to like see how they had tried to create this thing, and then you run into weird problems. Like they said, one of their main problems was at some point they ran out of oxygen.
Yeah.
They had a complicated mixture of why this happened. So one thing they said was they had just laid concrete, and the concrete sequestered a bunch of carbon dioxide. And so the plants couldn't take the carbon dioxide and then turn that into oxygen. And they also said the microbial life in the soil in there was doing like the opposite of that. It was putting out carbon dioxide. And
Yeah, because every time you till the ground or work the ground, it's releasing carbon into the air. I mean, that's just a thing that all farmers know. It's something that every time you're moving the ground, you're releasing a little bit more carbon, and they were doing that within a closed system over and over and over again. And what I found fascinating is like right now we talk about carbon emissions and stuff like that, and we're at like what was it, like 450 ppm?
I think it says 600 was like the we're in trouble point, right?
Yeah. Okay. Let's say 600. 600 is okay. We got to start worrying about things, but they had it up to 4,500 ppm of CO2 in there to the point where like they were like lightheaded and they couldn't think straight. And I think that's the only thing that they did have to have like outside influence on. Like
that was like they were saved because they pumped oxygen into the biosphere.
It is funny because apparently none of them were like really good farmers, because one of the things that they had to do is they had to grow stuff to eat. And they mainly grew sweet potatoes, to the point where they said like all of their hands were all orange from the beta carotene. It's just hilarious that they had all these sweet potato dishes that they were making, and all this other stuff. And they were losing weight. They said that like apparently it became like a spectacle. The media was all about it. Like,
yeah, I was surprised by this.
Really into
that
it.
Everybody really loved it at the beginning, at least.
Yeah, they even like had a few articles, big articles, written about it. But then people started coming and watching, and that became more of an issue, to the point where there was more pressure for it to be successful.
And almost, I think that's when it got worse, because that's when the pressure ramped up for kind of what would you call it? Like the managers. So the money guys behind this whole project. Yeah, were putting pressures on it. And then the people inside were also feeling that same pressure, where I find
it fascinating that John Allen, the leader of this whole like group, which this all basically started with like this almost not quite a cult, because I did look into it. It was not quite a cult. It's just more like a commune type in community that basically where these 8 people came from, that community. And he was the leader, but he wasn't in there. He was one of the managers outside of the dome. He was the one kind of helping micromanage everything from the outside. But apparently he became like kind of power hungry, and he was like anybody that wasn't a yes man, he was just kicking them out. So there were people be like, hey, like we've got to do this. We got to put oxygen in here. Like, you're fired. And it's just like, it was just crazy. So there was a rift starting to grow between the people, where like some of them were like, we got to get more food. We're running out of food. And also we can't breathe. We need to go back out or get someone to send us some food. And other people were like, well, no, we said we were going to do this. We got to be here for 2 years and nothing can come in or out and all this other stuff. So there's kind of 2 camps, and they still had to somehow coexist in this environment that they had to take care of.
Yeah, apparently they didn't particularly like each other by the end, which I could get that. I'd say that this is a pretty good catalyst for personalities, and being stuck and essentially surviving is what they were doing by the end. There was at one point where they were not planting seeds anymore; they were just eating the seeds.
Yeah.
So
and apparently that was kind of like the bombshell, because at one point John Allen's like, okay, well, this has kind of gone off the rails. It's not as scientific as we want it to be. I'm going to put this board of experts together that are these scientists and make this more scientific, to try to get, I don't know what their goal was, to get their money back or, win or make money. I don't get it.
I don't see any way you make money here. Like there's just not.
But so he gets this panel, and one of the people that was the dissenters called out somehow, and they're like, "Hey, man, like, no one wants us to say it, but we're literally eating the seeds, and we're gonna run out of food." And that scientist mentioned that in the big board meeting or whatever. And then all the scientists were like, wait, this is not what we signed up for. This is not okay. And that's kind of when everything kind of blew up on the first seal, as they call it, like the first lock-in of the people. But somehow they made it all the way through that. That's what's crazy.
Yeah,
Is that
they
they
made
actually made it 2 years. 2 years is a long time.
Oh, it's a really long time to be surviving on just like sweet potatoes and farming all day. Like that's hardcore what they were doing in there. It is like absolutely beautiful to look at though. I'll throw this in chat so everybody can take a look at it too. But it really is incredible to see what they, wow, that link is terrible. I'm sorry.
That is a very big link.
But it's, I don't know. It's just really interesting to see how they do this. And then I wonder how you like, is this something where as you were hearing it, you're like, this sounds amazing. I want to go farm all day and just
I
live
was
in
going to
that
ask
biodome?
you, I was going to ask you this. If you were young and didn't have anything to, any responsibilities or anything at the time, would you want to go do this?
It actually, like, as I was hearing about it and as I heard like what the plan was, yeah, it sounds kind of awesome.
I think I would do it.
But like, I would rather figure out a way so that you can figure out some like food situation.
I think that I
Like,
maybe regret it and it would suck, but
well,
it would be
I feel like it wouldn't suck as bad if you could
life.
figure out some kind of food thing, if you could make it better. Because I think they had some kind of animals in there too. They said at some point that they had livestock of some kind that they had to essentially raise and then like slaughter to eat it. But like, it's just, it seems very intense. But the entire, like, the amount of resources and effort put into this thing that has, I don't know how you could possibly make money off a test to see if you can make like hostile environment livable, if you can just like terraform essentially. That's wild. How do you make money off it? It's a great scientific thing, but they spent $250 million on this thing.
Yeah. And one of the scientists, which he was one of the ones that helped create some of the biomes and everything, and he was on that panel, and he's the one that kind of blew everything up. He said it was when he found out that they were eating the seeds and just everything had gone wrong that he realized basically all these people had like a theater background. They were all kind of like, they were, John Allen was a theater guy too. Like they did, it was like a troupe. And basically he said this whole thing was just theater. Like it was just for the publicity. It was just, I don't know. It was crazy.
It had to be beyond that. The amount of money put into this is ridiculous. But one of my favorite things about this is this is something that now you can go see because
it still
University
exists.
of Arizona is using it. They're running experiments in there on testing like sequestering carbon and trying to bring hostile like inert soil to life, because what they're essentially have turned this into is trying to figure out how to terraform somewhere like Mars, how to set up a closed loop facility for astronauts. And they also have done research on essentially how greenhouse gases and climate change could be like impacting things. One of the next things they're starting on is they have apparently one of the biggest saltwater like tanks in the world. It's like
Really?
600,000 gallons of salt water, the ocean biome. It's a ton. And essentially what they want to do there is start testing on how to regrow coral reefs, because that's one of the effects of climate change we're seeing right now is the bleaching of coral and the coral reef life kind of decaying. And so they're using this to study all that. You can also, and this is something that was maybe the wildest part, is Steve Bannon came in at some point.
Yeah, so they did this all over again. They did it for a second time. And I do like that they interviewed people that were in there and stuff like that. They interviewed somebody that was in the first one, and they interviewed somebody that was in the second one. And I don't know anything about Bannon really. I just know he's famous for like hostile takeovers of companies and stuff.
He's probably more famous for his role in the Trump administration and his role at Breitbart at this point.
I see. But apparently the money man Ed Bass was like, we got to get this back somehow and salvage something. I've invested all of this money, and so he got together with Breitbart Man, and they like did a
Breitbart, man.
hostile
Worst
takeover.
superhero ever.
Worst superhero ever. But that was crazy. I think it's crazy that they tried to do it again, and that people went for it the second time.
Here's the thing. Do I want to go visit this place? Yes.
Yeah.
Like tomorrow, I would go to this thing. It seriously is incredible looking. And they have really kind of changed how this is being used, because now it's essentially they want to bring tours through. They want to bring schools there and they want to educate. They're running all kinds of like testing there that's much more specific and much more scientific, where they're doing a lot of things for like, how can we survive on Mars? You know, how can we understand what to do when we get there? Because we're making strides all the time, but we have to figure out how to keep people there long term.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the perfect facility to test a lot of these things.
And they did actually learn some things during the experiment. You know, they apparently like discovered a new amoeba, and they like named it something after the biome. And then the whole, of course, the whole CO2 thing. They learned a lot about how CO2 can be trapped, and like you said, like in the concrete. Apparently, that was a big thing that they learned. And also, it was a good like psychology experiment in a lot of ways to see how people will interact with each other in enclosed spaces for 2 years. It's such a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely something that sounds really fun to like do, but I think it was just grueling. So it's so crazy to like think about it, because like essentially they say in 93, so this would be I guess the second run, they would spend 12-hour, like most of their 12-hour days just working in the fields and animal pens just to get enough calories for all the people in there. And things like mostly they ate sweet potatoes and beans, and it took 4 months for them to harvest enough ingredients to cook a pizza. And it's just interesting because like, okay, another thing they said was when they got out, I guess people had found out that they were all starving. So they got out and they're like, they brought them baskets of food and they ate it and they were immediately sick because it was too processed, and they'd just been eating seeds and water and beans for 2 years.
That's a long time, man. That's the thing is like, I think I would want to do this. 2 years is a long time to commit, though.
Like
that's a long
okay.
time.
Was there like an entire layer of ridiculousness to this entire premise? Yes, there was. But is it still impressive? Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was impressive the whole time. I was like, this is crazy that this is a real story. And that, like, just like you said, how the podcast actually goes about explaining all this is awesome, because they drop a lot of this knowledge on you about some of the behind the scenes stuff. They talk about the money things that were happening behind the scenes. They talk about the politics. They talk about the people in there. They get interviews from the people in there, because one went on to write a book also that is apparently a great way to kind of get some insight into the people more so than just the politics of it. Although I'm sure both come into play, but you get to hear the perspective of somebody who spent years in there and had to work through these problems and had to survive and starve and all of this. So it's just, they end up explaining and just kind of exploring this topic in such a awesome way that I was hooked the whole time. I was like, I got to see this place. And then I looked it up. I was like, I got to go to this place.
And Avery's a great host. Like, she really is. Everything she's done on 99% Invisible is amazing. And that other show that she did as a spinoff, because that was a segment on 99% Invisible.
Was it?
Yeah. So like they would talk about like, you know, hats back in the day. You know, why were all dudes wearing hats at one point and stuff like that. And they would go into really deep detail. I mean, that's the whole point of 99% Invisible. It's minute things, and then they just blow it up and look at it under a microscope.
It's a great show.
She's always great at the hosting, and
this is no exception.
It was awesome. They talk about Jamestown. I almost wanted to do the Jamestown one because I remember going there in like middle school, but I don't remember it good enough.
Very young. I don't remember any of it. Like
it's like a cloudy memory.
And then
they talked about Disney like Epcot, because Epcot was supposed to be a community. Like that was Walt Disney vision. His vision for Epcot was a experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It wasn't supposed to be a theme park with fake countries in it where you can drink around the world. Still great,
It's
but
found
that
its
wasn't his
niche.
vision. That was not his vision. People were supposed to live there and work there and all this other stuff. And so they talk about that and like Celebration, which a lot of people probably don't even know about that, but it's a community used to be owned by Disney and made by Disney. And it's a very like,
It's like
it's a
fancy
little,
condos, though. It's not like a utopia.
it's a little eerie. They're not condos. These are like multi-million-dollar homes.
I know, but it looks like condos. Like I went over there one time and it's not like I don't get it really. Like maybe
It's
I didn't
just
go. Maybe there's a fancier part I didn't go
there's a
to.
fancy part, but there is a not as fancy part. But they tried to make this whole community that was like based off of nostalgia and like the good old days, quote unquote. And the town square still looks like that. It almost looks like Main Street USA at Walt Disney World, but it's an actual community with stores and stuff. But it's not owned by Disney anymore. But the whole concept was kind of weird and crazy. And
Honestly, it's that is maybe the thing that I thought about this whole time is the premise of this is awesome. It's definitely something why you understand why people are always trying to find a way to make utopia.
I get the concept completely. I mean, you want to make something that is the best it can be and completely, different. Take all the bad things out and try to only keep the good things but there's people involved.
Yeah.
So
and then it just goes to chaos every time because that's how we do. We're just chaos. But yeah, amazing show. If you want to know more about it, go check it out. It's seriously a great show. There's a ton of really cool things. Definitely check out the show notes. We have a bunch of pictures of the Biosphere. There's a lot of it seriously is an incredible feat of like engineering, even though it's ridiculous that they spent $250 million on something that
So
it
much
just
money.
won. Like what's
money.
the game plan? Still impressive and amazing. But yeah, awesome show. So I have a recommendation for next week. And this one's going to be really fun because me and Kirk next week will be broadcasting from a haunted house in Alabama.
Heck yes.
And I found a show. It's not scary particularly, but it's just a great thing that we can do while we're on this Alabama vacation. And by vacation, I mean we're going to Alabama to get haunted.
We're going to go ghost hunting.
There is a show that is produced by WBUR, which is NPR Boston. And the show is called Endless Thread. And what this show does is it breaks down different random Reddit communities. So it almost reminds me like structurally a little bit of like Reply All, where they deep dive on like a thing that maybe you don't know too much about. And so there's always these super niche communities within Reddit. And one that I just saw the name of it and I clicked on it and I listened to it and it was great the whole time and blew my mind constantly is called Randonauts. It's a subreddit called Randonauts. And it is a subreddit dedicated.
Randy Knots?
Not Randy Knots. Not Smokey. Not good old Smokey. But it's a subreddit dedicated to the app called Randonautica, which Randonautica, I'm just going to read you what it is. The world's first quantumly generated choose your own adventure reality game. Explore the world you never knew existed. And so what you do, I'm just telling you what you do because this is what we're going to do when we go to Alabama.
Okay.
You get the app, you put your location in, and you say whether you want like an attraction, so probably somewhere normal, or like something really off the grid. And then you're supposed to think about something and like put your mind into the universe and it gives you a random location to go.
Put your mind into the universe. What are you saying?
I'm telling you. I'm
so confused.
That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of crazy stuff about this. Apparently some people think that this game or this application is really good at sending you where you need to go. I don't know if I believe that. I'm just saying that's what they're saying to do. But
I guess we'll find out.
That's what we're going to do. When we go to Alabama, we'll be talking to you from Alabama next time. And we're going to have a story about our Randonautica adventure. We're going to go somewhere.
God, I'm a little scared where we might end up.
They said to do it during the daytime, so don't be too scared.
Especially when it's not somewhere we live and know very well. It's like, because if we did it around here, we'd be like, hey, that's behind the Burger King.
Yeah, but that's lame. Behind the Burger King. That's a dumpster. No. But yeah, so this podcast breaks down the subreddit dedicated to that application.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to listen to it, and I'm excited to Randy Knot or whatever it is.
I mean, you can Randy Nut or whatever you're talking about, but that's not what we're going to do.
Oh, you said we're going to do it together, whatever this is.
No, don't bring me into this.
All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in for another fun episode of the Podcast Discovery Show. We will see you guys next week. And remember,
there's always more to discover.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Discovery Show. We would love for you to get in touch. We have a Facebook group called the Podcast Discovery Club, and our Twitter is @thepdsofficial. We also record the show live every Friday night at 8 o'clock on Twitch. We would love for you to be part of the show while we're recording it.
If you want to support the show, we have a number of ways you can do that. From our Patreon to our affiliate links, they're always linked in the show notes. In the end, you support the show just by listening, and it means the world to us. So thank you so much for being a part of our journey.